I'm happy to have you here. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what your spiritual practice is, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I generally just use my given Kemetic name, which is Nima'atitui, or Nima'at. I can't even say it today. Nima'at for short. Um, and I do on Substack. I've got Rooted Death Rights, where I write a lot about my work with death energy, death magic, necromancy, death doula type work. I do that from time to time. Um, I also do a lot of holistic type work, energy work, holistic health and life consults, things like that. Divination practices. I have interest in everything, so I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, which I rather enjoy. My spiritual background. So I am indigenous to the southeast United States. My people are Zayaha or Yuchi in English. So I do a lot of my familial traditions, which is based in animism and indigenous conjure. A lot of people tend to get that confused with hoodoo, which is very similar. There's a lot of overlap, um, but it's different. Um, so I do work on that quite a bit. I have a pretty blended ancestry, so I tend to pick up different practices and teachings from some of my varied ancestors from all over the place, just to kind of add in and honor them. If I get to go ahead, yeah, let's do this, then, I love researching and, just adding things as they come along, changing things up, expanding, using tradition as a foundation to lay something new that's my personal practice and not necessarily what's been taught or written about in books. So it's kind of, I feel like a magical life is a very personal type thing.
I would agree with that. One of the things that, well, first I want to note that we have a few people that have joined us live. So for those of you who've joined us live, one thing that I always like to do when I do these live interviews is I like to encourage you to ask questions. So as you're listening to the two of us having a conversation, if you're like, hey, I want to ask a question, please feel free to ask a question, and either of us or both of us will answer that question. I'll read it out loud. But that way we kind of get to have the full experience of having a live collaboration, which is a huge part of what Substack's about and makes it so magical. So I actually want to talk about a few different subjects, because one of the things, and the first subject I'm going to start with, I want to come back to the necromancy piece, because I do a lot of work with necromancy myself. So I definitely want to talk about that. But first piece I want to come to is actually talking about a subject that isn't really talked about a lot in magical practice. And this is in regards to somebody who is practicing magic who has a quote unquote disability.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to actually say not really disability. Maybe they just have they are other ability, or they have a different way of experiencing the world. Because I think that, disability kind of emphasizes like a disempowerment. And I don't know that I agree with that. I just think it's a different way of looking at the world. So, and I will say there is a long time ago when I worked at Amanian Press, we did an anthology actually on this very topic. It was the only anthology that ever went out there. It was Rooted in the Body, and I forget the rest of it. It was I did not edit the anthology. I just basically got the right editor and they put it together. But there isn't a lot of conversation around this. I think in general there's kind of like a stigma around it. Actually, there's like this idea. And this myth, I'm going to call it a myth, that people who aren't neurotypical, who are struggling with depression or other forms of mental experiences that don't fall within the quote unquote norm of society, either shouldn't be practicing magic or can't practice magic, or that there's challenges there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to invite you to share your own thoughts and perspectives on that, because as you shared with me, at least in an email, and I feel comfortable in sharing this on
Yeah.
here is that you've struggled with depression. So, and I have
Mhm.
too, just as an FYI to people. So
Yeah.
you're not alone in that. So go ahead and please share your own thoughts and experiences around this.
Okay. So I actually have several disabilities, and personally, I'm kind of torn on how to look at it, the whole disability label, because yeah, it does kind of define aspects of what I can and can't do because I have legitimate limitations with things. And it does set me apart from neurotypical and able bodied people. However, it doesn't make me less than, just different than. So it gets kind of like, how the fuck do I know which way to go with it? Because it depends, you know. But I don't judge anybody for how they want to speak it or refer to themselves. Um, anyway, so I do have a neurodivergence of aphantasia, which is where my mind does not visualize. So I absolutely suck at doing guided meditations and magic where you have to visualize the outcome and visualize the steps. I am a very present oriented person, so like future times and future activities makes no sense to me. I can't connect with that at all. Um, I do deal with depression, and sometimes it gets really, really bad. Most of the time, I've got a pretty good handle on it for the most part. And then with physical issues, I have multiple autoimmune issues. So there's also that physical component of what physically can I do or not do, in regards to a magic practice and living a magical lifestyle. And yes, I have had to make a shit ton of adaptations to figure out what works for me and what I can handle and the load that I can manage. And I think for people that have any type of difference, whether it's neurological, cognitive, physical, whatever, it's a struggle because everything is written for people who are linearly organized and linearly orientated. That think in that straight line. You have the past, the present, the future. And if I'm here right now, this is where I want to be next week. And I have to do step one, step two, step three, step four. This is how we get there. And I call on this particular deity or practice to get this particular response. And, this is how I get there. And I've read all kinds of books and I've seen everything. Oh, if you have a mental illness, if you're depressed, you shouldn't be practicing magic. If you can't do it, then you shouldn't bother. And I think that's a load of shit. Um, because yes, I struggle and I do have to make adaptations and do things different. But my practice, like I said, is mine and it works great for me. I have things I struggle with and I have things that I'm damn good at and get really great results with. So I feel like for people that do struggle, take the time to figure out how your mind works or how your spirit works, how your body works, and you just have to experiment and adapt with it. Which is one of the things I love about finding your Substack and your magical experiments, because that has really inspired me to go further with some of the stuff that I work on anyway. Um, and I do believe there are points in time when physically I can't do anything on days when I'm so flared up I can't get out of bed. Of course I can't do a physical practice, but I can do a mental practice. I could do an energetic practice, and that's just as valid as if I was casting a circle and lighting candles or whatever. Um, on days with, struggling with depression and I'm so low, no, I can't do, higher level things, but I can focus on sitting outside and talking with my plant. How is that not a magical practice? You know, I think it's just finding ways to adapt for the current situation. And like I said, for me, I really struggle with futuristic thinking and even past thinking, or like, revisiting the past, because like, okay, it's the past, it's done. I can look at it and I know what happened, but whatever, it's done. So just trying to find that way to take my present self and kind of focus on right now, but also I need to make future plans. I need, what am I going to do on the next full moon, kind of thing, or, whatever as far as magic practice goes. It's a struggle, it's hard, but it can be done. And I don't think people should necessarily give that blanket statement, oh, if you have this, this, or this, you got no business practicing magic.
Mm-hmm.
I that people should take into consideration where they are, because there are some situations that I have seen and witnessed where people shouldn't be practicing things or doing things because you're not in a good frame or a good stability to hold that energy and to hold that magic. And I think you need to have that level of awareness of yourself and who you're working with to know when not to fuck around and find out, versus, yeah, I can do this with some alterations. Yeah, we can make that work.
Yeah, I have a few different thoughts on that. First, I want to note, leaving art school said, I think it's important we don't compare ourselves to others. I think that leads to depression in various forms. I 100% agree with you on
Oh
that
yeah.
one. I can remember throughout my life different times where I would get caught up in comparing myself to other people, and it actually was really an icky feeling because then I tried to, like, in some form or another, tried to be more like those people because I thought they were quote unquote more successful. It's kind of the
Mhm.
capitalistic slash, I'm just going to call it societal trap that actually really disempowers all of us, because what it's doing is it's actually playing into the hands of the few people on top who want to keep everyone else down,
Mhm.
because then those people are constantly comparing them and trying to be like the other people. It's like the cartoon. It's like it's like this old comic that I found where it's like there's this rich white man, there's a poor white man, and then there is a person of color over there. The poor white man has a cookie. The rich white man has all kinds of cookies, and the poor person of color doesn't have a cookie at all. And the rich white man says to the poor white man, that person over there wants to take your cookie. Well, really, what are we looking at here? We're looking at the reality that, when we get into the comparison thing, a lot of times it's that same thing. It's we're letting society tell us that we should be a certain way,
Mhm.
that we should compare ourselves to other people or whatever else, and we're actually disempowering ourselves. So I think there's that. The other thing I want to say about this that I think is really relevant is, I agree with you about a lot of this. For one thing, like, I actually have written a lot of my work without visualization because I honestly find that visualization is a crutch in
Really.
magical practice. There is a lot to be said for somatic embodied practices that we can explore. And our bodies are so finely tuned to that. But we've been so sight oriented, and we're more
Mhm.
so than ever because of the way that, like, the technology. I mean, even right now, we have people watching this, and I don't have a problem with that. I love it. I welcome it. But still, it's sight oriented.
Mhm.
It's also sound oriented because we're talking and they're getting to hear us, and there's some interaction there. And I think that's a really good thing. And you and I can see each other's body language, and they can see our body language as well. So that helps. So there's an experience there. But I think so often there's an emphasis, like, on sight as in magical and ritual practice, and so there's that
Mhm.
visualization, and really that visualization is actually a crutch. It holds us back. And then, speaking as someone who actually was diagnosed with bipolar 2 depression a long time ago, along with some other things, well, one, I find that a lot of times our willingness to change the way we approach the world can play its own role. Um,
Mhm.
one of the systems of magic that I came up with is called the inner alchemy of life, and it's all about working with the neurotransmitters and the hormones of the body and the microbiota, the gut bacteria and all that, as entities,
Mhm.
living spirits,
Hmm.
and changing our relationship with those. And when we change our relationship with those, that can actually change some of those conditions in some ways. Now, I'll be the first to say don't go and do this. If like you're taking medication, don't go off that medication and just, start trying to do stuff like that. Like, you know, experiment carefully, test carefully. If you want to do something along those lines, you can check out my book or my class on the inner alchemy of life, but do it carefully. But the point being that there is that ability to do that. So I think that's really important. Now, so I think I appreciate that you said that, because I think it is really important. And I think one of the things to kind of really look at is, how does somebody with a quote unquote disability change their approach to magic to make it fit for them? So you kind of shared some of that, but I'd love to hear like some of your
Okay.
like practical experiences around that.
Well, a specific example. Um, I'm pretty sure you've probably read S. Connolly's Complete Book of Demonetry, right?
I have. Yep. She
And
and I are good
and
friends.
yes, yes, she and I are acquaintances and stuff as well. I love her work. Um, so in that, where she has the elemental balancing ritual, and that's where you visualize, you go in to balance your elemental makeup, and you go through and you do the visualization for earth, for air, for fire, water. I struggled with doing that for fucking years. And I was like, I was getting something from it, but not a lot. And it was like, and this was before I realized aphantasia was even a thing, because I only found out about that just a couple of years ago. And that has explained a lot for me, which has made a big shift in my practices. But up until this, I always struggled at any kind of magic that was, visualize this, and these deities appear to you in this way, or you'll feel this type of energy and these emotions, and I'm like, that makes no sense to me, because I process emotions differently, apparently, from what normal people do. And I don't really, I'm not able to go back and think about a past situation or something I want to feel and create that emotion in myself. I got nothing. I know what it's supposed to feel like, and I know that I've felt it before, but I can't recreate that. So, with the elemental balancing ritual, what I finally figured out that works for me is, when I'm working with the earth element, I have to have a bowl of dirt right there to touch it, to feel it, to look at, to everything, get that energy from that bowl of dirt. I have to have a specific bowl of water right there to work with the water element. So I can see it, I can touch it, I can put my hands in it, I can connect directly my energy with that energy. And the same with fire. I have to have candles burning, so I can feel that heat and know this is the energy that I'm working with right this minute. And with air, doing deep breathing and incense, and using my hand or a fan to kind of blow that around to get the feeling and sensation of airflow. Once I finally figured that out, it was like a, a totally different experience for me. And I know that seems fairly simple, but when you're struggling and you can't see the forest for the trees, it's like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Because nobody has, or at least I haven't seen a lot in the way of, if this doesn't work, you can try this. And I hadn't seen where anybody had written or mentioned, or whatever, as far as, well, if you're working with earth energy, just get a damn bowl of dirt and work with it. You got the physical presence right there in front of you. Go with that. And once that clicked, I think that probably made one of the biggest differences for me as far as a magical practice. So now when I go back and do the elemental balancing circle, I have physical representations of the actual elements right there in front of me, and I can connect with it more easily that way. But most rituals and spells or ceremonies or whatever aren't written like that. It's, you just connect to the energy and flow with your imagination. But when your imagination doesn't pick up on that kind of thing, or even if it does, but you don't know how to recognize it, oh, that's what that is. It's kind of hard to really make it work. So I would end up way more frustrated and just aggravated, instead of making accomplishments and getting shit done.
That's a great example, and I love it. Yeah, having the physical embodied experience. This goes back to somatic practices. Really, I think a huge part of it is that magical practices in general are catching up in some ways with somatic practices, but this highlights the importance of having those practices and creating more of an embodied experience. I know for myself, about 7 or 8 years ago, I shifted my magical practice more in that direction because I realized that was something that I was missing and craving, and that it
Mm-hmm.
needed to be more embodied because there was so much of an emphasis like on astral projection, on
Yeah.
or other things along the like getting out of the body. And it's like, well, why are we basically trying to replicate the book religions? Because
Yeah.
that's really what we see. The book religions are like, okay, get to heaven, get away from this body. Well, and look at the result. I mean,
Yeah.
the book religions play a pretty critical part in why the earth is despoiled in some of the ways that
Yeah.
it is.
And
And
I
of
feel
course,
like,
corporate greed and all that other stuff.
yeah, and I feel like too, there's been, like you said, so much emphasis on the spiritual aspect versus well, I live in my body. My body is how I perceive and interact and communicate with everything around me. I wouldn't experience energy work if not for my body to pick up on it and process it. So why am I ignoring my body? And I spent a lot of my years just ignoring it because, what the hell? It's here. It's just made to work. And I abuse the shit out of my body. And these days, I've done a lot of work trying to reintegrate. And for me, what I consider sacred union is coming to be fully embodied in my body and make it work and be able to recognize what's my body picking up on, what's it telling me, because your body is fucking amazing with just how perceptive it is and can be. But I think that we have been so taught to ignore the body and the sensations that come through the body and just focus on the afterlife and just focus on the spirit or the deity or whatever that doesn't, or at least for me, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. So, for those of you who are here live, I do encourage you to ask questions or leave comments. We'll be happy to address and answer them. So, I appreciate the comment from Leaving Art School. And for anyone else who wants to leave a question or a comment, we're happy to answer those and explore those. I'm going to continue on, but if you've heard anything that kind of sparks something in your mind, you're like, I want to share something, please do, because then we can share that on here, and that creates more of this interactive experience with Substack. And I want to encourage that because that's what makes the beauty of this occur. So let's shift focus toward necromancy. Now, I have my own thoughts on what necromancy is, the practice of it, but for people who aren't necessarily familiar with it, let's just briefly unpack that. So, what's your definition or experience around necromancy?
For me, necromancy is being able to tap into the energy flow of what we call death. So that would be the energy flow of decay, of rot, of physical death, any type of death type or transformative experience. And usually it's something pretty major. It's not just, I'm changing my clothes today. It's, oh, damn, I'm a whole new person today. Um,
What,
and then,
changing my clothes wasn't enough?
I mean, yeah. And it does include working with ancestral spirits and, anything that falls into the realm of the underworld, the dead, death, however you want to look at it. That's what it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not, and while, yes, it is my dream to one day raise an army of skeletons to march down the street, I'm not there yet. But a girl can dream. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not there yet either, but I'm working on it. No, yeah, no. It's interesting. I mean, I would agree that my definition is pretty similar to yours. I mean, I definitely think of, like, whenever I get the death card, for example, I think of that as that's transformation.
It's
Like
one of
so
my
many
favorite
people,
cards.
I know. Well, it's one of mine. The Tower card is also another one of my favorites. I know because again, people don't think of it in that way. They're like, "Oh, it's the Tower. That's a bad thing." Not necessarily. The Tower just means
Hmm.
you're getting rid of what isn't working in order to find the foundations that does work. And with death, it's transformation. Not just changing your clothes, of course. There's a little bit more to it than that. But although I do find that sometimes a literal change of clothes can make all the difference. Like, oh wow, I feel like a new person. It's
Hell
kind of an
yeah.
interesting thing. For me, I would say, like, with necromancy, my definition is like a lot of it is like ancestor work and connecting with the
Hmm.
ancestors and looking at that from a perspective of not just communing with them, but also maybe even healing them and working with them, repatterning the patterns in our own lives through working with them, because a lot of times we have behaviors, and I'll use an example that I had um, for a long time, and this kind of goes back to the comment that Leaving Art School had made earlier, which is I had this driving need to be recognized, and I didn't understand where it came from. I mean, part of it I could point to, like, oh, like my some of the stuff with my dad, but it wasn't until after my dad died and I was going through, like, his personal effects, and I found some stuff from, like, my grandmother, and she'd underlined in the newspaper, the local newspaper, every time the name Ellwood came up. She underlined it, and she underlined what it was about. And I was like, wow, that at that point I realized that's where this drive for recognition came from my ancestors, and I ended up doing a working with my ancestors where I basically healed that need for recognition. And after that I didn't care anymore, which was wonderful because then I could, like, focus. It unlocked my creativity, which had been locked up in some ways around that. It was like, well, you have to do things that are going to make you recognized instead of actually being real and present. So I think it's interesting because, like, with necromantic work, we're giving a chance to explore death and
Hmm.
explore all the different iterations of it. Are there any particular spirits that you like working with when it comes to necromantic work? And I don't mean even just like ancestor spirits, but I mean, like, deities or demonic
Hmm.
spirits or anything along those lines.
Um, I primarily do work with Anubis, which for me comes across more in the Yenefu of Wawet synchronized form. Um, it's like my primary patron, I guess you could say. So I do a lot of work with them, also Nekbet and Moot. I do a lot of work with the Kemetic deities primarily. The demonic deities, I do a lot of death work there as well, and Uranomus is a big one, probably one of the most well known ones. Arish Kagal, I do work with her at times. It really depends on what I'm doing specifically as far as who comes up or who comes, because I've had some experiences. Well, for one, I was doing some work not too long ago that I considered to be death work, and Lucifer came forward, and I'm like, "What's up?" Because you're like all light bringer, and you know, and I learned a lot from that experience because I was not expecting Lucifer was like one of the furthest beings from my mind as far as who would help me with what I was working on. Um, and I think it's kind of interesting how you said for you, coming to the need to be seen, because for me it's the opposite. It's the need to be invisible. And ancestrally that has come a lot from colonization, and you have to be invisible to not be seen, to be safe, to be alive. And so
Hmm.
I've struggled a lot with that. um and some of the spirits that I have been working with, that which I wouldn't normally consider to be death related, is working with Ra, working with Lucifer, and always Anubis is there with me. He's like my constant companion, pretty much, um, for everything that I do. And then we have um, in my Yuchi ancestry, and spirituality, we have the plumed serpent, um, and a horned water serpent that, depending on who you ask, come across as different things. And I do a lot of work with that spirit and that type of energy as well, that I have found to be extremely helpful to me in doing a lot of the death and transformation and transformative work, and a lot of serpent and dragon energy type work I have found to be quite powerful for me, um, in what I do personally with what I consider to be necromancy and death work.
I think it's actually interesting with Lucifer. The thought that came to mind when you were talking about that is actually, it does kind of make sense because, the fall, right?
Hmm.
There was a death moment there. There was a
Yeah.
transformation moment, So Lucifer went from being a quote unquote angelic being, at least in the classic mythology, as far as that's, Judaic mythology,
Hmm.
went from being or from being that kind of being to becoming a quote unquote demonic being. And so there was a death aspect to that. There was a
Hmm.
transformation.
That does make
And
sense, and that never crossed my mind.
well, I like to tease these things apart. It's actually interesting. I was this is kind of a personal side, but it's a funny thing. I was talking with my beloved today, and one of the things we were talking about was like Venus and Virgo. And I said, well, somebody who has Venus and Virgo is probably somebody who actually, because the thought was like, well, it's Venus and Virgo. We don't actually, like, a person who has Venus and Virgo doesn't, is going to have a restrictive love life. And I thought to myself, but actually, if you look at it from a different perspective, Venus and Virgo could actually be somebody who really wants to be a dominatrix
Hmm.
and wants to be in control and actually tapping into that dominant energy. Like, if that's something, if you're into a BDSM and DS dynamics, not that this is what we're talking about, but it's just an example of, like, you can
Yeah.
take a look at something and, like, the way, and this kind of goes back to our whole conversation, the way people portray something, the way that people look at something, a lot of times they'll look at it conventionally, but let's flip that upside down. Let's take a look at something from a different perspective.
Hmm.
Just because it's portrayed a certain way, you have to remember that the people who wrote about something wrote about it with their own experiences and their own agency, and they probably didn't even necessarily mean to limit their readers. They wrote with what they knew. But this is where it's so important to make magical practice our own practice.
Hmm. Oh
It's one of
yeah.
the reasons. It's one of the reasons in my books I say, like, or in my classes, it's like, just because I've said something doesn't mean I'm the ultimate authority. Feel free to make it your own. Like, challenge what I said. You don't have to agree with me, and you may not agree with me.
Yep.
I think it's really important.
Yeah, because it's like whatever I say or what I teach or whatever I do, I want. This is not the only way to do it. This is just my way. My way might not be right for you, but maybe it can inspire you to figure out something better that works for you.
Leaving Art School said, I've been considering Venus a lot lately and believe that there is a much more powerful element to Venus than we currently attribute to Venus, more than just sensuality. Yeah, I agree. I mean, look at Venus in terms of attraction. Attraction isn't just about sex and sensuality. It can also be about wealth. It can be about a whole bunch of other things. There's a lot, like with any of these traditional correspondences and things like that, and even like descriptions, there's a lot to be explored and examined. And so if we set ourselves up for a conventional, like just accepting the conventional explanation, we're really limiting ourselves. What are some of the things that you've done aside from what we've already talked about, to make your magical practice your own? You've read some of these books. You've had to adapt your workings around that. What are some best practices that you would share to other people that are watching this right now who may resonate with where you're at and be like, but how do I do it?
Yeah, I love to experiment, and I am a complete fuck around and find out kind of person because experience is the best teacher. And I have fucked shit up a lot, and I've learned a lot of lessons. But I would say, start with something small, like with necromancy work or ancestral work. A lot of people, I get a lot of questions about, well, how do I do that? Set up an altar. well, how do I set up an altar? What do I do? What, and it doesn't have to be complicated because like mine is just one of those little cubby shelves in the living room. Well, what do I put on it? Well, what do you want to put on it? But I don't know because you think this certain way. Um, so it's like I have a digital photo frame. I have photos of ancestors on there, and I have people on my ancestral altar that are not biological ancestors. But I get their permission to add them. We work together. It's all good. I have animals, photos of some of my pets, on there. Um, but making it to where it's more yours, not necessarily what you've seen, because I've seen some kick ass looking shrines and altars online. And it's like, that's cool, but yeah, that's not me. So it's a lot about, because I am very nature focused first. Um, how to explain this and consider myself like a lot of people are so distance is separate from nature. To me, nature is God. That's just it. And that nature is everything, it's creation, whatever. So I tend to base my stuff around what's nature. So like on mine, I have, acorns. I have a corn husk doll. I have pine cones on there. I have all kind of things that maybe you wouldn't normally consider to be an ancestral altar, but for me it works and it gives me a tactile sensation when I'm doing ancestral work that I can see it and I'm reminded of, okay, back in the day, my ancestors did this with pine cones. My ancestors did this with acorns. Then and that works for me. Now I have, and both of my dogs have respiratory issues, so I don't do a lot with incense and burning candles. The only candles I can stand to burn are beeswax candles. So that's an adaptation that I've had to make, and I'm fine with that because I freaking love beeswax candles. Um, so I have LED candles on my ancestor altar, and I use a lot of LED candles in my work when I don't want to actually burn beeswax candles. I use essential oils or scented oils. I make a lot of infused oils myself, so I make my own custom blends and put that on my altar in place of incense. It's things like that to know what you can and can't handle and how do you process things because I like and one of the things with being aphantasic, I couldn't tell you what people look like. I mean, I could recognize Taylor Ellwood because I've seen you several times. But if I had to give a police description, you might come out looking like SpongeBob for all I know because I couldn't give an accurate description. So,
I'll keep that in mind that if I commit a crime, I should do it in front of you if anyone's
yeah,
going to witness
I,
it.
I'm the perfect witness for criminals because I can't recall shit. Um, But it's like, with like my mom died several years ago. I know what she looked like, but I couldn't give you an accurate description. So I like having those photos up there, because it gives me something to remember and it gives me that feeling and that connection with my ancestors because I can't visualize. So and having things up there, that belong to them, or in my magical practice, outside of just strictly the ancestor work, I have objects that some of my ancestors had and used on a day to day basis to get that energy and that power to flow through. Because I have a hard time just thinking, okay, I'm going to connect with my grandmother's healing energy and we're going to do this and make, yeah, that don't work for me. I have to have that object to hold, to focus on, and I can connect with that energy through that. And I think it's just figuring, you know, what can you do? You have to recognize what you can't do, what your limitations are, but being able to see, well, what can I do? Okay, I know, like for me, I can't stand up for like 30, 45 minutes without having severe back pain and leg pain. I have my working altar with a chair, so I can sit down and do what I need to do. I have comfortable cushions on the floor, so when I need to do more in-depth trance work, I can sit comfortably or lay down comfortably on the floor in these cushions so that I'm not giving myself a flare up with pain and getting to the point where I can't move for 3 or 4 days because I wanted to do this work. Um, and sometimes it's something simple like getting really good floor cushions or having a chair, to be able to sit down and not feeling bad or feeling guilty because you need to make adaptations for what you do. Because I think when you come into it, oh, well, I can't stand up and dance naked around the fire because I just can't move that great. I'm going to have to sit down. Well, fucking sit down and do it. Your energy is just as powerful and just as valid if you're sitting and more comfortable versus being up and doing things that are causing you pain. Because I believe, and from my own experience, that has a very detrimental effect on the magic that you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. So I would rather, take extra steps and do things differently and have it work for me where I'm comfortable and I can get that energy flow and I can feel it flowing and coming instead of, if I'm trying to stand there and do something and my lower back is starting to catch and it's like, oh shit, I'm stuck and I can feel energy up to here, but it's not coming out. And it's like, what good is that going to do? It's not. So, you know, experiment to figure out what's going to work and what's going to keep you comfortable and let go of any kind of shame and guilt that you have because you can't do it like quote unquote normal people do.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I think those are some great tips and practices. So, folks, I'm going to be wrapping this up soon. So, if you have any questions, now is a good time. Like, if you've been kind of like holding back and thinking, like, this is a good time to ask questions because we're gonna wrap up here soon because I have another meeting going on here in a little bit. But one of the things that I think is really important as well is just keeping an open mind, being curious. I mean, one of the sayings that I have is challenge what you know to discover what you can learn. So, what are some things that you've had to challenge about what you know to discover what you could learn in regards to necromancy or the way you practice magic in general or anything else along those lines?
Um. Okay, so the old Ricky Tikki Tavi cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
and the theme of the mongoose was go and find out, and that has been huge for me because if it's something that I don't know, I'm going to find out. And being open to trying something different and being completely and utterly ridiculous with it. Not being afraid to, just be laughed at. If somebody else saw you doing it, they would be laughing their ass off because it looks so ridiculous or it sounds ridiculous or what. Who the hell cares? Because I do a lot of work with dolls and stuff, and something for me that I've caught some shit about from some people, but it is what it is. Is my son and I, we like to watch anime, and I have got so much inspiration from some of these animes that we watch from seeing the patterns of how they animate the magic workings. It's like, oh shit, that gives me an idea for an energetic pattern. I can copy that. But who the hell gets magic instruction from watching an anime?
Well, I did write
Yeah,
3 books on the topic called pop culture magic. So, I mean, there are a lot of people who do. I think it's
yeah,
funny that you shared that example of all examples. I'm like, yeah, well, you're right in the right wheelhouse here.
yeah. But it's like, most of the people that I know, especially like locally and stuff, it's like that's kids TV. But I'm like, what the fuck? They have a lot of shit that if you are open to look at something different, I mean, it opens whole new worlds. And, but the biggest thing I think, like you said, is just keeping an open mind and being open to something that you might think in a million years would never work. And that might just be the thing that actually is, oh shit, that was it. That's exactly what I needed.
Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap up here. I have two more questions for you. First question is, where can we find you on the web? Where can we learn more about you and what you're doing?
I am just on Substack,
Oh,
so
perfect.
I'm not that hard to find. Because I ended up deleting everything else several months back because I was just fed up with the bullshit nonsense. Um, and, I've had my Substack for a couple of years, but it's been off and on when I get on there. However, with some of the things I've been working on and changes I'm making in my life, I'm opening up to having more time to spend on posting more and sharing more. And I have several courses and stuff in the works and things that I've already done. I just need to get off my ass and get it posted. So anything I do will always be on Substack.
That's perfect. Yeah, I'm moving that way myself more and more. I actually don't spend a lot of time on Meta anymore, and I'm finding my life's a lot happier for it. So,
Sure.
yeah. And finally, the final question I always ask, and this I ask each of my guests, is what's your word of wisdom that we can take with us into the day ahead?
Um, I would say probably more than anything is to let go of fear, shame, and guilt. And I know that's not easy, but just flush that shit right down the toilet and be open to roll with what comes in after that's cleared out because it'll be way better.
Yeah, that's another favorite thing of Stephanie S. Connolly's works, excretion magic. I use it all the time myself. Yeah, let it all
Uh
roll
huh.
out, let it go.
Hell yeah.
It's amazing how it just clears the system out, and it's like, yeah, now I can be open to receiving the abundance of the universe. So there's a lot of truth to
Mm-hmm.
that. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. This has been a really fun opportunity. I think, one of the things that I'm finding really refreshing, I mean, in the past, I've interviewed a lot of people who are quote unquote big name authors and everything else. And what I'm finding refreshing about Substack is being able to connect with people who haven't necessarily written a ton of books or whatever, but they're doing really interesting work. And this is a great example of that. So I really appreciate everything that you've shared. And look forward to having you on again at some point in the future when you've put some of those programs and stuff out.
Cool, cool. Thank you. I've enjoyed being here. Um, and I think I told you in the email, it terrified the shit out of me. And that whole you got to be invisible shit. So this has been really therapeutic for me.
Well, hey, and look, you're still alive, right?
I know. Oh my gosh. And it has been a lot of fun. You're really easy to talk to. So I greatly appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate it quite a bit.
Well, I'm gonna wrap this up with one other thing, and it's a friend of mine. He has this hat, and on the hat it says, "Holy shit, we're still alive." And I think that this applies to these things like that. Like, like, look, we can put ourselves out there, we can extend ourselves out a little bit and do something different. And guess what? We're still alive. We're still
Hell
here.
yeah.
So thank you for coming on. Thank you for being willing to challenge that and to be here. I honor and celebrate your bravery for being here. And thank you all for all the people who are on here live. This show will be going up in a few weeks. So for anyone who missed it, you'll get to see it then. But thank you again and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.